How are you guys all doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiegue, live today on May the 29th to talk some more NFL with you guys. Some more stories I have in line for you guys here today. We're going to start off with some more wide receiver group rankings, this time in the NFC East. Then we're going to move it along to some rumors around the NFLPA reportedly getting together an informal proposal to send to the NFL to change the structure of the offseason around OTAs, around training camp, and the scheduling around that. That is yet to come. And also later on in the show, we're going to talk about also more international game locations, some possible spots the NFL could be looking at to host a regular season game in the near future. So stick around and find out more on those stories. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And before I start on the rankings, a reminder, as always, if you have any questions or comments, use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. By using this, I can see your question pop up in my chat box, and that way I'll read it on air and get your guys' perspectives on anything I say or on any of the topics at hand. It's a massive help for this show, so if you could, please use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. But that allows me to move now into the rankings, this time focusing in on the NFC East. Yesterday we did the NFC North, and now we'll keep going down the line here and talk about the Cowboys, the Commanders, the Giants, and the Eagles, and how they're looking at the wide receiver position. 4 through 1, again, as always, and there could be some surprises in here. This was a pretty interesting one to rank, but without further ado, I will move into the first one, that being number 4, the Washington Commanders. Just really came down to not a lot of reliable, proven options for the Commanders. You have Terry McLaurin, who I think is a very good number 1 receiver, very underrated and not talked about enough because of the situation there with the Commanders. They've never really had a solid quarterback. But in saying that, he still has put up some pretty decent numbers, and I think now with Jayden Daniels, this could possibly be the best quarterback he's ever had, just based on the ceiling that Jayden Daniels could reach. The other one could have been Kirk Cousins, but I think Jayden Daniels has that how much more of a higher ceiling than Kirk, so big things to come from Terry. But then you look at all the other options besides him. You have Jahan Dotson, who was a rookie last year, so you could sort of give him a pass for not wowing everybody. Not everybody can be a Justin Jefferson or a Jamar Chase coming out of college in their first year, but I thought he did pretty solid. I think he could be a good number 2 for them, but then you see on your screen I have Luke McCaffrey there. They just drafted him, and that's because of the lack of options that really the Commanders have. The only one with the reputation, really, just to touch base on that again, is Terry McLaurin. Jahan Dotson really hasn't done enough, and you have Amador Zaccheaus there also as some more depth at that position, but not really too much to work with here for the Washington Commanders. I'm still a little surprised they haven't addressed it a little bit more in the offseason. It seems like they've addressed everything else but the wide receiver position, so either they don't think any of the candidates fit, or they might like the group that they have right now. Some good reviews from Luke McCaffrey, but to expect what you'd want out of a number 3, potentially number 2 receiver in his first year, that's kind of hard for me to really buy into. So the Commanders will be the worst ranked wide receiver group just because of the lack of options there. Could be talented, but we just don't know yet. They are still very young, other than Terry McLaurin. But the first surprise of the list at number 3, the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys have the 3rd best wide receiver group, receiving group I should say, not technically just wide receiver group in the NFC East. Why the Dallas Cowboys? Well, too many question marks. Too many question marks for me. Ceedee Lamb, contract negotiations. Is he going to be there? Is he not going to be there? I know he's most likely going to be there. He said he was probably going to play this season in Dallas, but how those contract negotiations finally play out, that's still to be seen. How they work out and how much time does he have this offseason to really get integrated, that's all going to affect his play during the regular season. I know he's still training, but still, I find it more valuable to be with your team. Of course, he could show up to training camp, but the signs don't point that way for Ceedee Lamb and how very differentiated these two sides are on the contract negotiations. Then you look at Jake Ferguson, a good option at tight end. Oddly enough, he was probably their second best receiving option. Was second on the team in yards behind Ceedee Lamb. Ceedee was the only one to exceed 1,000 yards. Everybody else was around 700 or 600, that sort of range in terms of yards. Not many touchdown scorers either. Ceedee Lamb had the most on that team as well. So a pretty decent fall off once you get past Ceedee Lamb, and he's sort of a question mark right now, I guess, at worst for the Dallas Cowboys. Then, like I mentioned, Jake Ferguson, and then you look at Brandon Cooks, who is slowly just starting to slow down for the Dallas Cowboys and in his career. Last season wasn't that great for him. It wasn't that great for Brandon Cooks. And then you look even past that. If you don't really want to buy in on Brandon Cooks slowing down, well, you have now, who do you look towards after Brandon Cooks? The best candidate for that spot is the guy you see on your screen there at Jalen Tolbert. And he really didn't do too much last year. Not too many people honestly know about him or really have too much confidence in him yet because they haven't really seen him perform or get as many targets as these other guys have. Really, Ceedee, ate up most of those targets. Then came Jake Ferguson. Then Brandon Ayuk was used sporadically, and he was the third option on that team. So you don't really get to see more depth, more options that you have now after Brandon Cooks and Ceedee Lamb. Michael Gallup moves on. He was higher than Jalen Tolbert last year. So now we're really going to see Jalen Tolbert for who he is. So based off of that, you don't really know what to expect. He could be very good, or he could just be average, and the Dallas Cowboys don't really have too many options other than what they did last year to base it off of that. So I don't like all the question marks around this team, the depth issues that they have at this position and at running back and at offensive line. It doesn't really sit well with me. So for that, I only have them at number 3 because they have two solid options, one really great one, a solid one in Jake Ferguson, but then after that, no real reputation for these guys. The versatility that they bring, not too much after Jake Ferguson and Ceedee Lamb, and then also the amount of options that they have just really is limited to 3, maybe 4 guys that they want to go to. So that allows me to move on to the number 2 on my list, the New York Giants. Another surprise just because of how it all plays out, but very similar to the Cowboys, honestly, if you look at it. Based off of last year, they really didn't have a bona fide number 1 receiver, but that's where you get that man in the middle there, Malik Nabers, selected number 6 overall in the draft, and I am a really big fan of him. It's giving those Odell Beckham vibes that were all over New York when he was drafted. Everybody bought into the hype, and he performed out there from his rookie year and throughout the time that he was in New York. I think Malik Nabers can do the exact same thing for the Giants, and I know the biggest question mark is probably Daniel Jones, but he didn't have a very good receiving option that he now potentially has in Malik Nabers last year. I think that makes a world of difference. And apart from Malik Nabers, you have Wan'Dale Robinson, number 17 there on your screen. Then Darius Slayton as well as the big 3 in my opinion. But then you still have options besides that at Bellinger at tight end, Isaiah Hodgins, Allen Robinson, and Jake Stoll. Not the biggest named guys out there, but even still, I think they provide a pretty decent, weaponry there for the Giants to sort of work with there as their receiving group. And also, similar to the Dallas Cowboys, which is probably my biggest point, the Cowboys have one really awesome receiver, right, in Ceedee Lamb. Then after that, they have these options that you're sort of okay on. They're not the worst, but they're certainly not the best. I think it's almost the exact same thing with the Giants, but at this point, I would probably take Darius Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson, and maybe even Jalen Hyatt instead of Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tolbert at this moment, just because I feel like they have a little bit more to give now. Brandon Cooks is on the other side of his career, and Wan'Dale Robinson, pretty random, but I think I remember seeing Ceedee Lamb sort of mention Wan'Dale Robinson as one of the most underrated receivers he has ever seen, or that came to his mind in one interview. I know it's out there, pretty vague explanation, I do know, but I can almost guarantee that he mentioned Wan'Dale Robinson in there, and I haven't watched too much of the Giants to really verify that, but I know he said it. I know he mentioned his name. So a lot of people are sleeping on Wan'Dale Robinson. Darius Slayton, a solid year for him. Last year they had no receiver. They only had one receiver, Darius Slayton, over 770 yards. Three receivers had at least 500 yards for the Giants. So if you compare that to the Dallas Cowboys, Brandon Cooks, Jake Ferguson, and Jalen Tolbert all had that same amount or worse than those numbers of the New York Giants. This isn't an awful group. I just think the quarterback play sometimes masks that. And if they had, maybe a different option than Daniel Jones, or maybe Daniel Jones plays better this next year, I think these guys could really excel for the New York Giants, which means at the number one spot, obviously the Philadelphia Eagles, a boatload of talent, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, two wide receiver ones on any of these teams probably, other than maybe the Dallas Cowboys. They would have two wide receiver ones just like the Eagles do if Devontae Smith was on the Cowboys alongside Ceedee Lamb. Also, Dallas Goedert, one of the best tight ends probably in the NFC. Definitely one that gets slept on a lot, but he's also up there as a favorite for Jalen Hurts. Then the options besides that get a little iffy. You have Paris Campbell there as well, so they lost Quez Watkins, so that's going to hurt a little bit on the depth chart. They're going to have to figure out who's that next guy to step up, but those three guys there on your screen are all really in the primes of their careers. I think Dallas Goedert might be the oldest one at around 29, 28 years old, but then A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are 26 and 25 years old. Both of them could pretty much do everything. They've already established their reputation as some of the best receivers in the NFL, and none of these guys have more than maybe four or three really good options. The Giants have probably three to five options, but I think these three are the best out of the NFC, and they provide you the most reliable pass catching options and the most reliable pass catching group in the entire NFC. They're stacked on the offensive side of the ball. Now they just have to go out there and execute. Really no excuse not to with the kind of players that they have, but that's pretty much my list. The Philadelphia Eagles rounded off at number one, and as always, I would love to know what you guys think of it. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on the order of it, the Giants and the Cowboys, where they fell, and leave it in the live chat box or in the comments section afterwards. But in saying that, we will move on with the rest of the show. And when we come back, I mentioned before, we're going to talk about the NFLPA reportedly getting together a proposal to try and change up the offseason this coming year, potentially in 2025. I'll let you know what those changes are and what it could mean for the NFL in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. To continue on with the show and the second segment, potential big changes coming to the NFL offseason in 2025. The NFLPA is in the midst of finishing a formal proposal to completely change the structure of the NFL offseason, potentially starting as soon as next offseason in 2025. It is sort of still in an informal phase right now. It is all sort of gathering together, and the NFLPA is gathering a lot of structure and how they want to present this to the NFL. So nothing too concrete as of yet, but the NFL media reports that a formal proposal could come as early as some point in this summer. So keep an eye out for that. But at this moment, there has been already some, I guess, leaked information, some reported news on what potential changes could be coming to the NFL in the offseason in regards to OTAs, training camp, the start of everything, and maybe some time off and getting rid of some stuff completely as well. So as a reminder, I wanted to bring you guys, some sort of context, some sort of background on how the NFL offseason is sort of set up now, if you were unaware. This is where we stand right now in terms of the structure of the current offseason. All teams are allowed to begin their workouts starting in April. Then at that point, it's still just mainly conditioning, just strength and conditioning tests like I mentioned. And you're not really working with the whole team, doing team drills, going over concepts and stuff like that. You're just really working out, doing some positional drills, and you're just sticking to that main group of guys in April. Then it gets ramped up a little bit, not for everybody, but for the rookies in rookie minicamp. They join their teams, or they just join the rookies to have that sort of leg up, if you would, earlier in the season before more people start coming in to join them as a whole team later on. But rookie minicamp starts in May. Then you have the voluntary OTAs, which is where we find ourselves right now. Those are as well starting in late May to early June. Many teams conduct a mandatory minicamp as well at the start of June. So how those teams do it, it all just really depends on the situation and how coaches decide to structure that. But usually most teams have that mandatory minicamp for a short period of time at the start of June. And then lastly, once the first 2 weeks of June get by and everybody completely stops, you have that 6 to 6.5, 5 week period where nothing really happens in terms of team practices. Everybody goes their separate ways, continues their trainings most likely, and then they all regroup together in the middle to the late part of July for training camp before they eventually get into preseason and before they get into the start of the regular season as well. But now we get into sort of the changes a little bit here with what the NFLPA is trying to propose that will bring some changes to the offseason. According to NFL media, some of the changes that are being spoken about and are trying to be, worked out for at this point in the proposal stages is that it would completely eliminate the voluntary workouts, the spring workouts, and the OTAs as well in April and in May. In terms of, in favor of of a longer training camp, which would ramp up with the players not reporting until mid-June to early July. That was according to the informal proposal that was posted on all over social media by the NFLPA. So if you haven't seen it, that post by the NFL sources, I'm sure you guys can go find that anywhere on X or on Instagram and stuff like that. But that was the words that they used in favor of a longer training camp sort of ramp up period with the players not reporting until June and early July. So that's a pretty big change. There would be no OTAs that would start in May, and there would also not be no rookie minicamp as well. If everybody's reporting until July to June, that would be the biggest thing that I will touch on in just a few seconds. But also, there would be, like I mentioned, no technical OTAs, but it would mean a sort of OTA style of beginning of the offseason. So you would have no spring part of it. There would be no voluntary workouts or none of that. No conditioning, no working out part in the spring. Teams, players would all have off until June / early July, which would be replaced by virtual meetings in the springtime, according to some of those changes that you see on your screen. So you get rid of all of that, no OTAs, no minicamp. But once you get into June, you obviously don't want to jump into straight pads, straight hitting, and then just go 100% and risk a lot of people getting hurt. That's where the OTA sort of style of this beginning part of the offseason sort of comes in. You come in, June, July, and you sort of have OTAs at that point, and with the whole working out, strength training, conditioning training, then you ramp it up probably in the beginning of July, towards the end of June potentially, and then you go straight into training camp, straight into the pads, and then you flow through that whole period of training camp, no break in between, and then it just continues on like it usually does into training camp, preseason, and then the regular season, instead of getting some people together in the spring, not everybody, not being in pads, just being in shirts and t-shirts, working out together. I mean, all these guys just probably work out in general, so you don't have to be there, but, you get all these headlines that, oh, such and so isn't at OTAs, isn't at the voluntary workouts, then they, connect it to them not having a contract worked out at the moment. It all becomes a big headline. This new proposal to change that sort of gets rid of that and eliminates that, which is a point I pointed out to that I will get to in just a second on some of the positives of this new structure. And the NFL media continued on to say that a majority of NFL players support this proposal by the NFLPA, but the all-season changes technically are still part of the CBA that the NFLPA has with the NFL. So any deal, anything that would officially change would require a coming together and an agreement between the NFL and the NFLPA before any official changes are made to this offseason. The changes really just come from, you might be wondering, why do they want to change the offseason? It doesn't necessarily come up as a topic to want to change. In some people's minds it might be fine right now the way it is, but according to NFL sources, the changes stem from a desire to really reduce injuries and maximize the player recovery time from the previous season, which in all fairness does make sense. Some teams, if you're fortunate enough, you're playing into February, and then from February you have March, and then jumping straight back into April is really no time off for two teams, I guess, in all fairness, to just jump in right away if they want to. Again, it's all voluntary at that point, so there is that. But also, some teams, realistically, most teams don't make it past late December, early January. So even then, you still have most of January, February, March, and then April, which, again, give or take, people will have different opinions on it. Is that enough time to really just get back into the swing of things? I think it's all right. When this came up as a topic, as a news article that I read, it did come as a bit of a surprise, if I'm being honest, just because, again, I haven't seen too many players complain about it. But according to the NFLPA, most players agree with this, and most people around the NFL are agreeing with it, that come with this change and the kind of issues that could come about with changing it like this could be no rookie minicamp and no OTAs. The OTAs don't really affect me too much. I don't feel too strongly about it in one instance, or two the other way on it as well. But rookie minicamp to me seems like a bigger deal than I think most people would give it credit for, just because I feel like the rookies need that extra leg up, need that, a little bit of an earlier start to their NFL careers, because most of these guys know how the offseason works. They know what the routines are going to be. They know what sort of drills and what sort of things they're going to go through. The rookies don't really do that. They're just meeting everybody. So to make them come in at the same time as these veterans, I think it would be more of a shock and more of a slower process of learning for some of these rookies, and you might not get to see such young players make such a big impact because everything was just thrown at them all at once. They're still really meeting some of these guys as people off of the field, off of just playing in the NFL. They're meeting the coaches, they're meeting the players, they're really getting to know everybody's name. And to throw them in all together, I think that would be a mistake. I think the rookies need that extra period. That's the biggest thing for me. If they included a rookie minicamp, I think it would be all right. I don't think it would be such a big deal, but that's the biggest thing for me, especially for the undrafted free agents. Those are other guys that are just trying to prove themselves. They got a little bit of a chance there by being undrafted free agents. Then if you take that away and they're not allowed a rookie minicamp, then you're really taking away a big chance for some of these guys. And I have a comment here from Eric Rodriguez saying exactly, rookies are freaking rookies, essentially throwing them into the lion's den and setting them up to fail is exactly what I'm trying to say. With undrafted free agents as well, I think really would hinder them, and you wouldn't get some of these Cinderella stories, I guess, some fun stories that you get to see in OTAs. Who's this training camp hero, who's really making a name for themselves. You don't really get to discover anybody that way if you take away, I think, the beginning part of this offseason. And also, I can understand wanting a longer break. Like I mentioned, it would go from 4 months essentially to 6 months, which again would seem fair because obviously playing in the NFL comes with a lot of sacrifices and a lot of pain on your body. So I can understand that as well. I don't really like the break in between minicamp in early June and training camp when it starts in July. I think that's pretty unnecessary. How it works, you sort of start to ramp it up in OTAs and in minicamp, and then you really separate for like about a month and a half, and then you get back together straight into pads. I wasn't ever a real big fan of that. So I like that they're taking that away. No real issues with that. And it takes away, really all the headlines you get right now. Just today, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase don't show up to OTAs, but with this change, you're not going to get any of that. No one's going to make a big deal out of it. And it really gives these teams more of a period to work out some of these deals. Until June/July, you have an extended period to work out these contract extensions, work out any restructuring of deals. So that, I'm sure, is another reason why the NFL and the NFL owners would want to do this, giving them that extra break there to work out these things and not have all the media attention on them for why isn't T. Higgins here? Why isn't Jamar here? Why isn't Justin Jefferson here? It takes away all of that, which could make it a bit more boring for the media, but I'm sure a lot easier for the NFL. And just really, I could just become a fan of this. It doesn't really affect too many players, I would think, but the rookie thing, that's really what I'm stuck on. If they could add a rookie minicamp to these changes and just keep it maybe in late May, early May, and something like that, I think this change would be fine. I think most people would agree with it. So that's where I stand on it. Again, let me know what you guys think of it in the live chat box or in the comments section afterwards whenever you watch this video. Big changes potentially on the horizon for the NFL and the NFLPA proposing this, but we'll see where this ends up, potentially in the summer where a formal proposal could be coming towards the NFL, but we'll put a pin on that conversation. I'm sure I'll revisit it, and we're going to head to another break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about more international locations that the NFL is reportedly looking into. We have some in Italy, maybe Japan, Abu Dhabi in the Middle East. More on those stories and more on those locations when we return. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Jumping right back into the show and into another pretty interesting topic that I'm sort of starting to stack up here on the show. More international game locations that could become hosts for regular season games in the near future. After the NFL owners really passed this ruling in December that made the NFL jump up from the 5 international games that they have been planning out throughout the regular season to about 7 to 9 that would be potentially coming in the years after this season. That's really where all of this comes from. Why is there such an increase in international games? Why is the NFL looking into so many different places to host these games? Well, it is because of this ruling that they're going to lead to potentially look for more places, not to just have 4 games in London and then maybe another 3 or 4 in Germany, where it has become the more comfortable location for the NFL. And the current CBA also allows only up to 10 international games to be scheduled for the NFL. So I don't think it'll go up to 10. We're probably going to see 8 to 7 as an increase out. According to the New York Times, the NFL is considering a game for the first time ever in the Middle East. Abu Dhabi is probably the most likely one at this moment. The NFL has never played there, obviously, nor preseason game, nor any game of any magnitude in the Middle East. But I think this is interesting, and it is a little surprising if, obviously because the NFL has never played there, but just from the fact that the Middle East and Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, all these places are getting a lot of big name sporting events to, be hosted there. Abu Dhabi's been involved in hosting some North American sports like the NBA. Some preseason games have been held there. I think it was 2 years ago when the Bucks played there. The FIFA World Cup was also held there, and WWE has had their pay-per-views as well in Saudi Arabia. Not in Saudi Arabia yet, not Abu Dhabi specifically, but more events are getting sent over there to the Middle East for a number of reasons, for a lot of revenue reasons, and also just off of the top of my head, I know some soccer games are being played over there. I know Spain does their domestic tournament there, their Super Cup, the Spanish Super Cup there, a mini tournament where they travel from Spain and have 4 teams play over there. So it seems like more sports are getting involved in this. More sports are having at least 1 or 2 games or a couple of events over there in the Middle East, and the NFL is no stranger to this, no stranger to following trends and hopping on what's new, what does everybody have their eyes on. So this doesn't really surprise me, but it is just weird to say that we could have a game in Abu Dhabi potentially in the near future, but it is just being looked at right now potentially for the NFL. And also, reports around the NFL say games in Italy could be considered, or in Japan as well. Italy has, again, never hosted an NFL game before. This would be the first time the NFL hosts, or the NFL travels to Italy for an NFL game, a regular season game. There was a weird period that I wasn't aware of, or just an unfamiliar period, I should say, a while ago, called the American Bowl era. If most of you or some of you are familiar with it, where the NFL had international games during an extended period of time, where they would have some preseason games abroad to try and expand their game. This was the first attempt of the NFL trying to bring the NFL to different locations. Now it seems more common, but before it was done before to sort of, set the roots in some of these places. And some of the places that they went to was in Tokyo. Tokyo hosted an NFL game 12 times, 12 preseason games technically, but they were host to some NFL level of games there in the Tokyo Dome or in the Osaka Dome as well. Those are the 2 main candidates if the NFL had games in Japan as well. So if you look at all the facts, Italy, Japan, the Middle East, and you add it on to other locations that have been mentioned as well around the NFL having these games in different countries, I listed them all out as possible locations for international games, potentially as soon as 2025, and you have some that are pretty much confirmed. I know the Madrid, Spain one at the Santiago Bernabeu is pretty much going to happen in 2025. South America, if it all goes well in Brazil down there, I don't see a reason why they wouldn't maybe bring it to another country like Argentina, or maybe a different part of Brazil or something like that. That could be another candidate. Mexico City has been rumored with, again, hosting another game. There's a lot of NFL fans there. I know, oddly enough, the Steelers have a pretty big fan base down there, so they're rumored to be involved. Obviously, you have London as well as a continual host of NFL games. I'm sure they'd want, again, to host another one next season, in Germany, in Frankfurt, or in Munich, like they're having games in this year. I'm sure there's still reliable options for the NFL to have games there. Then you have Paris, France, which I touched on. I want to say in the YouTube shorts that I did before, they're also rumored to having the NFL be looking at some locations in that country. Ireland as well, in Dublin. They actually hosted an American Bowl era game there back in 1997. So it's been a while. Since they last hosted, but there has been an NFL game there before. Then I know I've talked about Australia as potentially hosting one. This one could be the furthest from happening just because of the time difference. Would be very tricky and very interesting to see how the NFL ever plans a game in Australia because of the I think it's 13 or 12-hour time difference, something like that in Australia, something crazy, to plan an NFL game there. Also, Italy, like I mentioned, and Tokyo, Japan. A lot of countries listed there. I want to say I named like 10 to 9 places there on that list, on some of the places where they could have it. And, that sort of begs the question now, could we see an international game potentially in 8 to 9 different places in 2025? I think it would be interesting as well. Also with this, there was a technical issue here. But anyway, like I mentioned, this would be interesting just from the simple fact that I listed so many options that the NFL has now with these international games. And one, it is crazy to think of now where we are at this point in 2024, talking about these international games where a few years ago it was really only limited to maybe Mexico City and London and Germany, and then that was pretty much it. I don't think anybody really could have imagined how many more options now there is to potentially have some of these games at. And it is great. I'm a fan of it. I like the NFL expanding, but in terms of the question, could we see international games in all these different places, just one in each country that I listed? Probably unlikely. I think it would just be too much travel for the first year of this new ruling that the NFL passed. Like I mentioned, they passed this back in December, so there is going to be an uptick in international games. You don't know how many exactly yet, but from the 5 that we currently have right now, I think that probably jumps up to probably 7 or 8, like I mentioned before. And to give a ratio right now, currently it is 3 countries and 5 games. That's sort of the ratio that the NFL has going right now in Brazil, the UK, and in Germany. I would probably say it would go up to 5 countries based on all the rumors that I believe are the most likely to happen. So I mentioned Spain as probably being the most likely. That's another country, make it 4. And then Mexico, I probably think, is a good candidate to jump into that list. So in total, I would probably say it's Mexico, Spain, the UK, England, and probably that's probably about it. 5 different countries. And then in terms of games, 7 games I could potentially see. Maybe 2 in the UK, maybe 2 in Germany, 1 in Spain, 1 in Mexico, and then you have another one as well. So that's probably where it all stands right now with the NFL and all these international games. They're definitely playing it by ear. I know this is a weird topic and a just weird landscape right now because they have so many options so quickly, but I would be interested to see where it all goes from here because the NFL, I feel like they want to do this, but it would be interesting how they essentially do this based on the travel, the logistics of it all, and the scheduling of it all. It would be something to see, but I'm looking forward to it. I have another comment here from, again, Eric Rodriguez. Maybe in a European division, the Jacksonville Jaguars had about a handful of games across sea last season. Yeah, the Jacksonville Jaguars are probably the UK's team, are probably the home team in London, so that wouldn't be something I don't think the NFL would be opposed to. I'm sure, it seems like they're open to everything right now. A European division, I think a sole European division would be hard to do, just based on me, on my thinking. The NFL could think differently, but maybe just a series of teams that make it easier for them to travel over there, if that makes sense. The Jacksonville Jaguars have been one that is always seems to be going over there. So if you have a couple of those teams that always play internationally, I think would be interesting to see. Like I mentioned, the Steelers are pretty big in Mexico, so if you always have the Steelers at least once a year playing there, I don't think that would be a bad idea. And then still just mixing in some teams here or there. I know part of the new ruling is that each NFL team has to host one international game now, one every 4 years instead of one every 8 years. So they have to take that into account. But I'm not opposed to it. The European division having some teams specifically play in some locations, I would definitely not be opposed to it. You'd have to see what the fan reaction is to that, but I don't think that's the worst of idea. In now a new landscape for the NFL where they find themselves in now, good, and it's also a little bit uncertain, a little bit uneasy for some fans that might have to get up a little bit earlier to watch some of their teams play, but all in all, I think this is just big picture thinking. I think this is a good thing for the NFL, growing it more and more, getting it up there to compete with some of the bigger worldwide sports like tennis, like soccer. I think getting it up there would definitely be a good thing for all these people across the globe to see football, because it is something definitely to watch. It's a big deal, obviously, in America. I think it would definitely get a lot of fans elsewhere, and how passionate people are about sports in certain areas as well. I think this could all just turn out very well for the NFL, but in saying that, we will move on with the rest of the show. Two more topics to talk about here. A potential bigger role for Eagles second-year player Jalen Carter in that defense, how he could probably be their best pass rusher in 2024, and why I believe that, and why maybe their new defensive coordinator Vic Fangio also believes it, plus an update on Deshaun Watson's shoulder rehab, how's that going, and how important this offseason is for Deshaun Watson is all coming up in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere, we'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, and talking now about the Eagles and one of their star young players in their team, Jalen Carter. Really surprised a lot of people, especially myself, last year, in how really just seamlessly he transitioned into the NFL from Georgia. As a rookie, he recorded 6 sacks, 33 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 2 forced fumbles, and a fumble return touchdown in 16 games. Really just hit the ground running right out of the gate for the Philadelphia Eagles. And with all the depth that they had on their defensive line, I think, it was a pleasant surprise, but he slowly started to become the starter there for the Philadelphia Eagles. And it came at a very good time, just because obviously nobody could have predicted that Fletcher Cox was going to retire at the start of last season. But now with Jalen Carter in there and Jordan Davis as well as support, I think you didn't want to see it happen, but having Fletcher Cox retire, I don't think puts Philadelphia Eagles fans in such a dire desperation for who would replace him. You have very good players there, very young players in Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis specifically to sort of carry that mantle now for the Philadelphia Eagles. But specifically staying on Jalen Carter here for a second, new defensive coordinator Vic Fangio really pointed out Jalen Carter as one of the stalwarts of this team and how he could really make an impact. And to do that, he wanted to focus on Jalen Carter's conditioning and just his overall shape of football getting into the season. He had a very good start of his rookie year, but then, as most rookies do, throughout the NFL season, they're not used to playing that many games. Most of them hit a wall, and that's where you see the sort of fall off where Jalen Carter sort of struggled there or didn't make as much noise towards the end of the season, sort of like most of the Eagles defense did as well. Jalen Carter was no different. Over the last 6 games, he only recorded 2 sacks and 2 quarterback hits on 12 pressures. So a pretty big difference there from the monster that he was in the first 11 games there in the NFL. Vic Fangio touched on it a little bit, really just wanting to challenge Jalen Carter to be more conditioned in order to play him a lot more, since he's already got the talent to be out there. You just have to get him in football shape to be able to play more and more and really help out this team more and more. Specifically, Vic Fangio said, I'd like him to be a lot more conditioned than working on technical stuff and where we've been at all year. For the technical stuff, he sort of has it already, and Jalen Carter also added that he did more conditioning this offseason in hand with what Vic Fangio sort of challenged him there with, instead of doing like you see in the offseason, working on your hand positioning, working on timing, or just working on certain moves you want to get better at. Jalen Carter really made it a point this offseason to work on that. And just overall, I like the idea of Vic Fangio challenging Jalen Carter a little bit as well, with the retirement, like I mentioned, of Fletcher Cox. The Philadelphia Eagles are certainly going to need it, and also Brandon Graham not being the same Brandon Graham you saw maybe 3 years ago, 2 years ago when they made the Super Bowl. He has certainly slowed down. I think this will probably be his last season with the Philadelphia Eagles, so he's sort of stepping back a little bit and now opening up the door for Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis to step up. And I think they're really going to need it because they're going to look to Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis to really maintain a constant pressure through the middle, because of the factors of losing Hassan Reddick or actually trading Hassan Reddick to the New York Jets, technically, because they couldn't figure out a new contract for him, so they figured it would be best if they traded him. You move on from Hassan Reddick, and that would just by default require more pressure from the middle of the field, because I know you have Bryce Huff coming in to essentially replace Hassan Reddick, coming from the New York Jets to the Philadelphia Eagles, funny enough. But he only really had one breakout year with the New York Jets when he posted, I think, 10 or 11 sacks this past year. Then he earned himself, just based on last year, a decent contract with the Philadelphia Eagles. So that's all great. He is sort of riding that momentum from last year. But the question is if he could stay consistent with that. Since last season, not too many people heard of Bryce Huff or just saw him play at such a level that he did last year. So I still have some doubts around Bryce Huff if he could come in and right away produce like Hassan Reddick did for the Philadelphia Eagles in his time there. And because of that, you also have Josh Sweat on the outside as well, opposite of Bryce Huff. And seeing how he recovers after 2022, where Josh Sweat recorded 11 sacks and really had the best season production-wise of his career, he dropped that number to 6.5 sacks in 2023 and actually had a streak, an 8-game streak from week 10 all the way to the end of the season where he didn't record a single sack in any of those games. So obviously that can't happen for the Philadelphia Eagles if you want to compete in the NFC East and in the NFC, of course. And also you want some redemption from last season where you really left a bad taste in everyone's mouths if you're on that defensive side of the ball. You didn't look very potent as you did in 22, very disruptive, or just making plays like they did in 2022. So where does this all tie in Jalen Carter? Well, it is just, the question now, is Jalen Carter's contribution the most vital, the most needed at this point in time for the Philadelphia Eagles? And I would probably say, weirdly enough, that I think it is. I think they need Jalen Carter now more than ever, which again is very weird to say because he's only been in the league 1 year. But because of where the situation the Eagles find themselves in, uncertainty with Josh Sweat up in 2022, down season in 2023, can he keep it consistent for the Eagles? And also Bryce Huff getting accustomed to a new team, a new system, new defensive coordinator, having a great season, but again, you'd want to see a consistency with him there. And also, he didn't play a lot of reps for the Jets as well, so he's going to have to play a lot more here. How does he keep that conditioning and that level of play up throughout all 17 weeks of the NFL? That's another question mark. So, for me, to have Jalen Carter in there, I think that's the most vital piece of this defensive line for the Philadelphia Eagles, and I think they're going to need his contribution more than anybody else's, because if you can have one guy being that menace in the middle of the defensive line and getting all the attention from the offensive linemen, I think it would make it easier for Josh Sweat and Bryce Huff to get off of their blocks a little bit quicker if Jalen Carter comes in and picks up right where he left off at the beginning of last season compared to the end. And you also just have to get more from Josh Sweat and also Bryce Huff. You want to make it easier for them a little bit at the start to get acclimated, but you can't just have Jalen Carter carrying this team. It's not going to work if you're not getting pressure from the outside. So you can sort of withstand it a little bit to start, but then you need Josh Sweat and Bryce Huff to eventually get it clicking and contribute to this pass rush. A little bit of uncertainty, I think the most we've ever seen with this Philadelphia Eagles team in recent memory, because Howie Roseman does a great job of stacking up each offensive line and then the defensive line as well through the draft and whatnot. So right now, it's not that it's thin at the defensive line, but I think you don't have too much room now. The margin of error has slightly decreased compared to last season, where you could rotate Fletcher Cox and you could rotate Brandon Graham in. Jalen Carter was coming in. Jordan Davis was there. Now, Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox on the way out, or Fletcher Cox is already out of the organization. You don't have too much room now to maneuver and really mess up with here. These guys have to step up, and Jalen Carter, to me, is the main guy that will be the glue, that will be the catalyst to this entire defensive line working in 2024. Is it fair in his second year? Maybe not, but that is the situation the Eagles find themselves in. I think he can handle it. He is a great player, but he just has to execute it in this coming season. But that'll do it for that segment. We have one more to talk about on today's episode on how Deshaun Watson's doing with his shoulder rehab, where he is at this point in the offseason, and why this offseason could be the most important for Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns in this Deshaun Watson era. So stick around. I'll provide the reasons to that in just a few seconds. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Thank you for joining me here on the last segment of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to go over the last segment on Deshaun Watson. What's going on with Deshaun? Where is he on his shoulder rehab in 2024 in this offseason? You know, a lot of ins and outs, a lot of inconsistency with Deshaun Watson. Not really his fault because he is dealing with those injuries, but because of the fact that he hasn't been there this whole time through the 2 years that he's been with the Cleveland Browns. There is some question marks still, in my opinion, which makes this offseason a little bit more important. How important this offseason is for Deshaun Watson, well, I'll provide some of that information here. Head coach Kevin Stefanski provided an update on Deshaun Watson's rehab going post-surgery that he had at the beginning of this offseason, and he has been throwing again, which is a good sign, but Kevin Stefanski said, I've been able to watch him the last couple of weeks now that we've gone into phase 2. So I've seen him throw. He's making great progress, and we'll continue to just follow the medical team and this. But he looks like himself, which is the biggest thing that I think most Cleveland Browns fans want to hear. Stefanski also mentioned that they're rotating the throwing days as of right now for Deshaun Watson. So he's throwing every other day right now in phase 2 of the offseason and through OTAs. They hope to ramp it up a little bit more towards minicamp. Their scheduled minicamp is supposed to be from June 11th to June 13th. So by that point in about 2 weeks now, a little bit less than that, we'll see where Deshaun Watson is in his rehab process and how much more normal he is looking. If he can build and stack days consistently, I think that would be on track on where you'd want Deshaun Watson to be heading into the break before training camp. And also, Watson still remains on the 5-year, $230 million fully guaranteed deal that he received before missing the time with the band and also dealing with injuries. He got all of his guaranteed money before any playing occurred. So that sort of leads me into the biggest point and the question, like I posed before, how important this offseason is for Deshaun Watson. Well, that price tag, that guaranteed money, hangs pretty heavily over Deshaun Watson's head. That's the first thing anybody will point to. That's the first thing I pointed to because I think it really does matter when you're talking about a quarterback that's getting paid that much, the most guaranteed money in NFL history. I think just some players would be unfairly criticized if they were receiving that amount of money and they weren't performing. If Lamar Jackson was probably receiving this amount of money and say it was 2 to 3 years ago when he was really struggling in the playoffs, everybody would be killing Lamar Jackson for how bad he's performing and bringing up that contract whenever they could. Now, after some progress that has been made there, after another MVP, and after showing that he is one of the best quarterbacks in the league by consistently being there, he earned himself a very good payday and is now amongst the highest paid quarterbacks. So that's really how it's supposed to go. I know it's not Deshaun Watson's fault that the Browns paid him ahead of time before he even played. That's more their mistake, I guess, up until now. But that's just the reality of it. Deshaun's going to have to live up to those expectations with that amount of money that he gets. And in his time as a Cleveland Browns quarterback, he has about a 60% completion percentage, only 2,200 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. But on the good side of it, on the positive side, Cleveland is fortunate enough to have kept around the majority of their team. When they signed Deshaun Watson, they could have easily maybe had that year or two period, as some teams do, to risk getting a quarterback, sort of like the Lions and the Rams did, bringing in a quarterback to win the Super Bowl that year and gambling away their team that might not be there in the following season. The Cleveland Browns are fortunate enough to have had the same team for them for a while now. You have Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, Amari Cooper, Nick Chubb, David Njoku, who had a great year last year. All these guys are still there, and they made the playoffs with Joe Flacco, who played 5 games in the regular season and had an amazing end of 5 games there for the Cleveland Browns. 60% completion percentage, 1,600 yards, 13 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions for Joe Flacco. Just sort of highlights what sort of talent he's dealing with to just come in there without playing any football all regular season, come in with that level of talent. Putting up these numbers is not bad, and having a 4-1 record again is not bad for someone just stepping in there to be a temporary quarterback. And you'd have to think now, if Joe Flacco made the playoffs really with this team there towards the tail end of it, where the playoff race was a little bit close with the Browns, with the Steelers, and with some other teams there on the brink of making it, you would have to, be assured that Deshaun Watson's going to do that, right, with the level of talent that they have. So that's a little bit more of added pressure there. And I say this offseason is so important because of that added pressure, with Joe Flacco taking this team to the playoffs there towards the end of the season. There is that pressure, but also it is just weird now in this offseason to say that he still has to get accommodated a little bit to this offense a little bit more, just because in a way he has been so in and out, dealing with one injury, dealing with another one. And when he has played, it just seems like him, the receivers, they're not on the same page as of yet, because there's been so much inconsistency there in the appearances. So in a way, he's still sort of trying to get not used to all these teammates, because I'm sure they're obviously around each other a lot of time throughout the regular season and the offseason. But on the field is a whole different thing, is a whole different situation when you're trying to work on games in the AFC North, late game situations, all the little intricacies of an NFL regular season. Being there in the moment, I don't think you could just replicate that in the offseason. So it is in his best interest now to really make the most of this offseason period and try to get as acclimated to his team, because if he stays healthy, all those expectations are going to be there to make the playoffs again and get this team to where they should be. And it's also interesting on the expectations, like I mentioned. I will get to that, but Eric Rodriguez, again, having a comment here. Exactly. Just a quarterback away. Watson, even with all the scrutiny, is talented enough to make a big difference. And that's sort of where I was getting to my last point here before I wrap it up, is that because this team is so talented, talking about in the AFC North and comparing Deshaun to all these quarterbacks, the funny thing is about Deshaun and being a quarterback away, like Eric Rodriguez mentioned, nobody is expecting him, funny enough, to be the best quarterback in that division. Nobody is expecting him to be better than Joe Burrow, better than Lamar Jackson. I think what they do for their teams is going to be certainly different than what Deshaun Watson has to do for his team. I feel like they have to do more for the Cincinnati Bengals to win and for the Baltimore Ravens to win than Deshaun Watson's going to do here. So realistically, you're only asking him to be the third best quarterback in this division, and you're still going to have a great chance to make the playoffs. So it sort of eases that pressure off a little bit, but in a way, if he only has to be the third best quarterback in the AFC North and he still maybe struggles or it doesn't look right, there's going to be even more scrutiny there for Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns and how they paid him that amount of money for it to look as bumpy as it could still be. Those are all still hypotheticals, but it is just an interesting topic to think about because the AFC North is super competitive and Deshaun Watson doesn't even have to be the best quarterback in that division to make the playoffs. So if he could just do that, be the third best and still make the playoffs, I think it would pay off a little bit for the amount of money that he got, and then you could build on getting better in the years to come. But that's where it is right now with Deshaun Watson and his shoulder rehab. Big season and a big offseason coming up for Deshaun Watson once we get into training camp and then obviously into the regular season. This team is talented enough. They just need Deshaun Watson to be there every single week or as much as possible compared to where he has been to give him a good chance of making the playoffs and making a deep run in the playoffs where they definitely have the talent to do it. They just need their quarterback to be there in 2024. But in saying that, that will do it for me on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's episode. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and X and TikTok for more of this network's content. If you want to see more of me and this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel on YouTube for YouTube shorts that are posted every day around different topics. All the live shows are recorded and posted on both channels as well, and also individual segment videos. If you don't have time to watch an entire episode and just want to tune into one specific segment, there are videos tailored to that. Also, as a reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL discussions and conversations around the league with me, Manny Maradiegue, as your host. Thank you guys for joining me, and I hope to see you guys all back here again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.